So when I do this workshop as a live occurrence, what I do is at this point split the group up into small groups, the large group up into small groups of 4, 5, 6 folks, and I ask them to introduce themselves to each other in their groups, and then spend 15 minutes answering these 3 questions. Is your job stressful? If so, what are some of the causes and what are some of the effects? Multiple purposes for that activity, but it's ultimately about connection, and it's about building enough of a connection for them to be able to get vulnerable with each other in some group work in the afternoon. So it has multiple layers of purposes. But it also is information, data collection with getting this done. And when they're done, we take a 15-minute break, and then I come back and process with them some of their answers. I said, so how many of you for how many of you is your job stressful? And everybody in the room raises their hand. I don't tell the other group, live groups this yet. I'm going to break it down for you, but I'm going to go ahead and foreshadow this for you guys, is that I'm going to spend the next hour or so showing you that your job is not stressful. Demonstrating that to you, showing you how that is truth, that your job is not stressful. And that's one of the profoundly different components of this course versus every other one that I've taken or seen around compassion fatigue, prevention, or professional resilience. Almost when you believe that your job's stressful, then all you got is self-care. But when you start understanding what's going to get presented to you in this course, then you start seeing that it is that self-care, a significant component of professional resilience, but it's just a small slice of the pie of the skills that you have to develop and the processes that you have to do to be able to stay healthy in those toxic environments. But when I'm doing this process with an individual, and every single person I work with, I ask them the question, is your life stressful? And everybody goes, duh, why do you think I'm here? Why am I paying you? Of course it is. Everybody always says, yes, it is. And I use this as a gambit to do what I'm about to do with you. And what I'm about to do with you is give you an owner's manual for your autonomic nervous system. And a lot of you do not have owner's manuals for your autonomic nervous system. And as long as you don't know what's happening with your autonomic nervous system beneath your level of consciousness, hence autonomic, then you are conscripted to be a victim of that autonomic nervous system. And this is truly a case of learning better equals doing better. So as you start to see what's happening beneath your awareness and understand it, now you can intervene with it and begin to not be a victim of the external happenstance of your life. And it starts with, that whole process starts with understanding the autonomic nervous system. Now, I had this ultimately it was a lot of research and work that I did that helped me to discover this, but a lot of it was Robert Sapolsky's work. Some of you have read his Pulitzer Prize winning Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. And once I read that book, I was like, everybody needs to know this. So I started kind of plugging that into my trainings and plugging it into early treatment with my clients. What I found pretty early on is that people have a pretty low tolerance for hearing about the autonomic nervous system. And I very quickly became Charlie Brown's teacher. Some of you are old enough to remember Charlie Brown. I suspect that there are a few folks that are watching this video going like, who's Charlie Brown? But you become like his teacher, where you're going, whoa, 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 whoa. That it is not, it doesn't hold interest. It's not valuable for my clients. So what I had to figure out was I just couldn't be a professor. I couldn't be, Dr. Gentry up on the mountaintop professing this information to these peons that I was working with. I didn't believe that way, but at least not consciously. I think probably unconsciously I held some of that. But I've evolved and I've grown. I have awakened. And so today what I want to do is I want to do this as a peer-to-peer process. And I want to engage the people that I'm working with and make this something that's intriguing. So the way I do that is with this gambit. I say, is your job stressful? Is your life stressful? Depending if I'm working with professional resilience or just people in general, towards helping them. And almost everybody says yes. And when they say yes, I take out my portfolio and a pen and I draw down a line down the middle of the page. And I ask them on one side I have causes and on the other side I have effects. And I start with effects and I say, okay, so your life's stressful. Identify for me, what are some of the negative effects of stress in your life? And here's what most folks come up with. Anxiety, depression, fatigue, headaches, under eating, self-medication, irritability. And I'm doing this globally. And intentionally want you to look at this. I want you to look at this particular material beyond just workplace. So I didn't do just workplace causes. I wanted you to start to see this globally in your life. And hopefully you'll be able to backfill that to all the things in workplace. But when I'm doing it with professionals, what I hear is the demands, bosses, low pay, angry patients, regulations, documentation, electronic health records. That all of that stuff is, kind of what I hear when I keep that just circumscribed to professional context. But as I said, I'm making this global. So, here's some of the things: work, finances, health, the virus, the news, the media, family, relationships, and demands. Bunch more, but we're going to use this as archetypal of what I get from most people. And as soon as I collect that data from an individual on a portfolio or from a group in a workshop, and I'll, pretend that I just elicited this from all of you, then what I do is I turn around and I show them the data that I've collected from them. And I say these words. Let me break out my little pen here. These are not the cause of your stress. And as long as you believe these things to be the cause of your stress, then check it out. You're going to continue to have those. Matter of fact, the primary reason why you have these in your life is because you mistakenly believe these things to be the causes. Audiences almost always, when I do that to them, do this. My clients go, I'm paying you for this? Like, really? They're a little incredulous, a little irritated. But I never do this from jump. Like, I don't start out my very first session with, hey, what are your causes of stress? Oh, by the way, those aren't the real causes of your stress. Hopefully what I've done with my clients, I do this in the second, third, or fourth session, somewhere in that realm with them, this psychoeducational piece. I do it in the second session in the ARP. I do it, we're an hour and a half into the workshop, and I've told you that, I've done all this data collection. I've done these thousands of courses. So, that while I may still be an idiot that I've been able to stay afloat as an idiot for 37 years in this field, and have been able to publish a lot of stuff, and so that while you're incredulous, what happens to most people is that they also start to have, the other competing thing is they've got some curiosity. They have this kind of kernel of expectancy that I'm going to produce an alternative explanation of what the cause of stress is. That's the way I've set it up, and most of you are intuitive. Your mirror neurons are going ahead and connecting the dots and starting to see. He's going to say that something else is the cause. Wonder what it is. And that's, for most people, intriguing enough for them to give me a little bit more rope for me to tighten the noose. For me to go either win or lose in this process. So I forge ahead brazenly and use a couple of other different little gambits to help engage. So you see that this is engagement. This is making it personal. And I've done this in a lot of different ways. I've taken to doing this mostly over the past 6 or 8 years. Is I use a collage, and I've developed several of these that I have on PowerPoint slides, and I'll bring it up on the iMac in my office or on the screen if I'm doing a presentation. And I have folks look at that for 30 or 60 seconds, and then I ask the question: is your life stressful? No, that's not the question that I asked. My head was running along and doing all kinds of different things, and I said absolutely the wrong thing, and my Prevagen has not fully kicked in yet this morning. I ask instead, we've already done, what are the causes of, is your life stressful? Now I ask, are you perfectly and totally 100% safe right now? How many of you in the room, when I do this as a training, how many of you in the room are perfectly and totally 100% safe right now? Totally. And yeah, over 100,000 people I've done in this course and other courses that I do this process with, all over the world. And it's rare. It is in single-digit percentile, for sure, of hands that go up when I ask that question. 1 or 2%, 3%, something in that window. Most folks just sit there looking at me like this. And when nobody raises their hand, what I say to them is, oh, I just learned from you that there's a really good chance that your anterior cingulate has atrophy. And you may want to get that looked after. For those of you who haven't heard of the anterior cingulate cortex, it's getting a lot of press in neuropsych these days. It has been for 10 years, 15 years, longer. Daniel Amen and others that were, when the brain scans started, when PET and SPECT scans started, back in the early 90s, mid 90s, folks started scanning brains. And what they found with folks that had high psychiatric symptoms, depression, anxiety, is that they found this pinky nail sized brain structure that's you see where it is. It's below the corpus callosum, all of the fibers that connect the two brain hemispheres together. It's above midbrain, but below neocortex. It's kind of limbic. And what they found was that this pinky nail sized structure, with people that have high levels of depression or anxiety at the beginning of treatment, they had smaller than normal anterior cingulate, and it had less electrical engagement, less electrical energy. And that was early 90s. That was sort of intriguing. That was interesting. But as they continue, monitored that over the next 8 or 10 or 12 years, what they started finding is those folks that went through treatment that was effective is that for a goodly percentage of those folks that had small anterior cinguli that were less electrically engaged, as they went through a course of treatment and that treatment was effective, whether that was psychopharmacology or psychotherapy or combination of those two things, as the patients reported symptoms lessening and their quality of life enhancing, when they did exit scans from treatment, they found a anterior cingulate that was restored to normal or better volume and normal or better electrical functioning. And that was intriguing for a lot of neuroscientists, because what that started to kind of be was a measurement of treatment effectiveness that is not dependent upon patient report. In the same way that cortisol is being used presently a lot as a dependent variable in studies. Lowering cortisol levels is thought to be a pretty high functioning of a treatment. If you can lower people that have symptoms of PTSD's cortisol level, then that's pretty profound. And different than just self-report. So that it became more and more intriguing. But for our purposes today, the reason why I want to talk about the anterior cingulate is the anterior cingulate is part of your threat detection circuitry. So the way that threat detection works in human beings is that your sensory system, your eyes, your ears, your nose, your taste buds, your feelers, both tactile and somatic, are constantly absorbing information from the environment, the external environment and the inside environment, and turning what your nose does and your ears do, actually your cochlea and your olfactory, your eyes, your retina and optic nerve, turn the sensory experiences of the images, the sound of my voice, everything else that's happening in the environment, turn those into electronic impulses. And if there is no, and that's constantly a stream of information going into your brain. And if none of those sensory experiences are perceived as threatening, then what happens is they go on, they just move through the brain to the hippocampus and get turned into long-term memory. They just become memory. But if one of those sensory experiences that are happening in the environment are perceived as threat, then what happens is the amygdala activates. And Joseph Ledoux calls the amygdala the hub and the wheel of fear, that it's what starts the whole system in its threat response. And one of the things the amygdala does, the charge of the amygdala as it activates the whole threat response system in your body, is it charges up this anterior cingulate to begin a process of communicating with the frontal lobe. And what happens is that the frontal lobe starts to focus on that particular sense. So, as an example, I'm in a Arizona Trauma Institute's training room where there's 40 seats or so, and it's also our recording studio. And right out back, the emergency exit there is a parking lot back, kind of a strip mallish kind of thing, and dumpsters and all of that back there. And so I'm sitting here talking to you on the screen, and let's say that I hear a loud boom out the door. then what's going to happen is the very first thing I'm going to do is, if I'm talking to you guys and I hear that loud boom, I'm going to stop, and all of my attention is, I'm going to have a freeze response immediately. The amygdala shut everything down, and what's happening before it engages, there's the charging up, and there's usually a freeze response with that. You know, if you smell something burning, you start paying attention to all your attention is on that particular sense. So if there's a boom outside the door, then what I'm doing is I'm not paying attention to you guys, the camera, the anything anymore. That all of my attention now is focused on what I'm hearing out there. And then I hear, let's say that while and what the anterior cingulate and the frontal lobe are doing back and forth is trying to contextualize that sound and figure out what it is. If I'm smelling something burning, and I look over, and my brain's going, coffee. And there's a coffee pot over there. And let's say that when I came in this morning that I had fixed a half pot of coffee and drank a cup, and now it had cooked down to 1/4 of an inch, and it was the coffee burning, the smell of that coffee burning off in the bottom of the pot. What happens to my threat response when I'm able to go, oh, that's just the coffee pot over there? And I get up and I go over and I pour it out and I turn the coffee pot off. Or the boom outside, I hear after it, that it ends up being a truck that while it was starting, it had a backfire. What happens to the threat response? Poof. It goes away. And I don't know why I don't have that slide in this one, but let me call that up here and get that from another training and share it with you, because I don't know why it wasn't in the PowerPoint for this one, but it wasn't. And in my review, I missed it. But that is called neuroception. It's what Stephen Porges calls neuroception, which is the ability to have enough of your brain involved during a threat response that you can, and that you're able to see, oh, wait a minute, there's nothing really dangerous here. That's just a perception, that there is not really any encroaching danger in this environment right now. I am perfectly safe in here while there's the smell of burning, while there are booms going on out there. I am still perfectly 100% safe in this environment. That ability to do that is how you interrupt the threat response. It is what we call top-down self-regulation, brain to body. And it's really important. It's really important to develop that capacity. And let me show you how important it is. And this is what I do in the workshop. I say, okay, to demonstrate the importance of this process, what I'm going to ask all of you in the room to do, and all of you watching this, is I'm going to ask you to take the next 10 seconds and do what Fritz Perls, the founder of Gestalt psychotherapy, said that we should all do, which is to lose our mind and come to our senses. What I want you to do for the next 10 seconds is I want you to just have sensory awareness of everything happening in this moment. What you see, smell, touch, taste, and hear in this environment. Somebody left a brown and pink little furry bunny over here, so I'm aware that that's a brown and pink furry bunny. That there's a red cord case, fan, seats, smells. Not really any smells that I'm aware of in this room. I can hear the hum of air conditioning unit, and just noticing all of that without. What I'm going to ask you to do in those 10 seconds is to divorce your learning history associated with a brown and pink bunny, or wherever you are, with the sensory things that you are encountering in the space that you are watching this. Just notice them without going to your learning history with a bell or with a black portfolio or with a tissue box or with a bunch of wires or anything else. Just noticing for the next 10 seconds. All the sensory experiences that you're aware of in your environment. And I really can't do this with you. I wish that I could be with you in the room right now and process this in person with you one-on-one, but I can't. But the way I do this as a live course is I ask the audience to do that, and I say, okay, now would you please point to me something in this room that is dangerous? And what happens is, folks, I often do these trainings in hotel rooms, ballrooms and hotels, and folks will point to a chandelier in the middle of the room. And I walk up under the chandelier, stand directly under it, so it's right over top of my head, and I look at the person who told me who pointed at that, and I say, am I in danger right now? And they usually either nod yes, or they say this, you could be. And both my answers are, yes, you're right, I could be. But am I? Use your senses. You had to go into your learning history to perceive that I'm in danger standing under this chandelier. Because is it falling? And I'm only in danger if it's falling. As long as it stays up there and intact, then I can stand under this for all day long. And there's no danger. But if the plaster starts coming down, if it starts, vibrating or swinging or anything like that, then yeah, I want to step out from under it. But right now, I am perfectly and totally safe under this chandelier that we know is not staying up there forever, but someday is coming down. But right now, today, it's not. You're going to have to do better than that. Name for me another danger. Find me something in this room. None of you raised your hands when I asked you if you're 100% safe. So that must mean there's a lot of dangers in this room. Please show them to me. Somebody almost always points to a light socket. And I walk over and I stand by the light socket and I say, I'm in danger now? And usually it's the same answer comes out. You could be. I say, you're absolutely right. I could be. But I didn't ask you if I could be in danger. I asked you, am I in danger? Am I in danger standing beside this electrical outlet? Well, it could catch on fire. You're right, it could. Is it on fire? No. And, they look at me. I say, you're right. So therefore, I'm not in danger. Neither is anybody else in this room from that wall socket, that electrical outlet over there. You're going to have to do better than that. And a lot of the times folks will do this. And I'll say, I get it. That you have lots of scary thoughts in your head. But check this. You're not in any danger from your thoughts. You're only in danger if you engage behavior upon those thoughts. So if the voices in your head are telling you to stab yourself in the throat with a pen, you're not in any danger until you pick up that pen and start stabbing yourself in the throat with it. So no, you're not even in danger from your thoughts. Past few months, when I do this, haven't done it live since then. I did once in mid-February. But it's been since then since I've done a live training. But in person, I've done a lot of video conferencing and still have those interactive encounters in the video training. And sometimes folks say, coronavirus. And I say, yeah, coronavirus can kill you. But you are not in danger right now if you have the coronavirus in your body. Because it is not the coronavirus in your body that's the problem. It is your body's inability to stop the viral replication of the coronavirus. And until the coronavirus replicates to the level that it starts to impair your functioning, specifically breathing, then you're not in danger with the coronavirus until then. So no, none of you in this room right now today are in danger from the coronavirus right now. And what I'm absolutely certain of is that even if you are, the threat response is not helping you. And this process of neuroception is really important, because what's been true for me with thousands and thousands of workshop participants is people with advanced degrees hallucinate the presence of dangers that are not present. That almost every professional I ask that question to is, are you 100% safe right now? Answers it in the negative. And then they cannot produce for me something that's really dangerous, something that is empirically dangerous right now in this moment, to life or limb. Sometimes people talk about emotional danger, and this ends up usually being a little bit conflictor, and people get upset with me for saying this. But there is no such thing as emotional danger for adults. There is for children, for sure. But, once you get to adulthood, then feelings are not dangerous. They're just uncomfortable. You're not in danger when somebody's criticizing or ridiculing you. Some of the outcomes of that can be dangerous, but not the experience of it. Feels like it, but it ain't dangerous. It does not require you to have a threat response in your body and stay in a threat response. And as I said, this is a big deal, because watch how big of a deal this is. Ask yourself right now, am I really in danger in this second? And notice what happens in your body when the answer is no. Feel that? For most of you, you just had a relaxation response. You just felt what it feels like to have a body release and let go of its ongoing unconscious threat, hypervigilance, constant perception of threat. Ooh, you just interrupted it. Cognitive to body, brain to body. That's what neuroception does. What we're going to find this afternoon when we get into self-regulation is that it's not enough. Neuroception's a place to start, but it's not enough, that we got to add to it interoception, which I'll get into this afternoon, body to brain. Both of those combine to build the process of self-regulation and interrupting threat response. But people will not start the process of self-regulation until I can do this with them, that I can help them to see that there is not any real danger in this moment. Then, and only then, will they start to say, oh, wait, so then all this threat response activity that I have in my body, it's not necessary right now. Let me interrupt it. Let me stop having all of this juice and energy in my body in anticipation of something happening that may or may not happen, but in anticipation for it, it's not helping me prepare for, it's not helping me to be better guarded and safer staying in hypervigilance. And what I want to invite you to do, and we'll walk you through that over the next 15 minutes, is to begin to replace unconscious and instinctual hypervigilance with conscious and intentional relaxed vigilance. Not going Pollyanna off into the world that is dangerous at times. Keep the head on the swivel, stay environmentally aware, but doing that in a relaxed body. You are stronger, faster, and smarter in a downregulated autonomic nervous system than you are staying jacked up all the time. Cool. So here's the thing. And I mean this with respect, even though it's a little bit sharp. Doesn't matter what you think. Well, I can't really say that because I'm not with you. I can say this to a room full of people because I'm in there with you. I don't know where you are right now. So this may not be true and honest. What I can say, that if you were in this room with me right now, I could say to everyone, if there were 100 people in this room right now, what I can say to all of you is that you are all perfectly and totally 100% safe right now. Doesn't matter what you think. You're still safe. That may change in a couple of seconds. Somebody may burst through there with a weapon. There may be an explosion. There may be an attack. Who knows what's going to happen? But for right now, you are perfectly and totally 100% safe, independent of your brain. No matter how scared you are, you're still safe. And folks will not start the process of self-regulation until I do that process with them, until I help them to get here now. And what I've found is that for a goodly percentage of my clients, 60, 70%, this is the first conscious moment in this experience with me. It's the first conscious moment of their lives that they have known and felt safe. It's a cool thing. So, what happens in the body of somebody who is perceiving threat? Bunch of stuff happens, doesn't it? Heart rate increases. Respiration rate increases. Volume decreases. Circulation becomes less to the extremities and more to the large muscle groups, center mass, less out to your hands and feet. HPA axis, hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal, engages, and your blood chemistry changes. Cortisol, adrenaline. Bunch of physiological changes happen in the cascade of the human being's threat response, is that many things happen. And they are all about increasing the energy level in your body to prepare you for aggression or avoidance, to save your life. What about muscles? What do muscles do when we perceive a threat? They constrict, don't they? Your muscles constrict when you do manual labor, when you're doing a workout. Your muscles constrict. But as soon as you're done with the labor, as soon as you're done with the workout, your muscles relax again. What causes muscles to constrict and stay constricted? And that's the perception of threat. So, how often during the day do you have tight muscles? That's how frequently you are perceiving threat throughout the day. How often do you perceive threat through the day? Folks say, this usually evolves from, when I ask that question the first time, folks say, yeah, a few, to a few hours later, a lot, to a day or two later. A lot of people go all the way to this place, only one, and it's all day long. That for me, 20, however many years into working with this material, what I can tell you is that I am constantly perceiving threat while in waking consciousness. It's pretty constantly happening all through my day. And 95% of those threats are not threat to body. They're not perceived. The perceived threats that I'm having are not perceived threats to limb or life. They're threats to ego. But the sympathetic nervous system still responds fully with all that activity when I start perceiving threat about what you're thinking about me. How about brain activity? What happens to a brain that's perceiving threat? Is it more active or is it less active? And some of you caught that. That's a tricksy question. It depends on where you are. That when you're relaxed, comfortable, at peace, satiated, those are all synonyms for parasympathetic nervous system. I can't write very good with this thing on the trackpad. PNS, parasympathetic nervous system. And, parasympathetic nervous system is the dominant nervous system for all human beings. It's the nervous system we are built to live in. All what we've been talking about previously is the sympathetic nervous system, the SNS. And the sympathetic nervous system is the threat response. So what turns on the sympathetic nervous system? The perception of threat. And when the sympathetic nervous system, when the parasympathetic nervous system is dominant, when we're not perceiving a threat, as I said, this whole area of the body, you do a scan of the brain. If you do a scan of a person's brain who's not perceiving a threat, who is relaxed and comfortable, what you see is that whole area of the brain is lit up reds, oranges, and yellows. All the electrical energy is going to the neocortex, to the part of our brain that does thinking and executive functioning. But at the moment that we perceive a threat, and the longer that we stay in the context of the perceived threat, what starts happening is this energy gets siphoned away from the frontal lobe, from the temporal lobe, from the neocortex, and it gets delivered here to the midbrain, to the brainstem, to the thalamus, to the basal ganglia, to the amygdala, to all of those reptilian structures. And the anterior cingulate actually is one of the structures that does that. The anterior cingulate is kind of the fulcrum and the seesaw about where's the energy in the brain gone. No threat, then the energy in the brain is going to the executive functioning. But as there is threat perceived, then what it does is it draws that energy away from the frontal lobe, the temporal lobe, the executive functioning areas, because, you don't need to know how to do calculus if you're getting, your leg eaten by a crocodile. You need your motor skills, and you need your strength and stamina and speed. And it works well, the SNS does, to be able to do that. You hear about people able to run 35 miles an hour and do all kinds of pretty spectacular survival feats. And that's pretty cool. But here's the thing. The SNS is only good for about 30 seconds. Once you've kind of exhausted that initial burst, then what starts happening, and you stay in the threat response without mitigating it, then the anterior cingulate keeps drawing more and more and more energy away from your executive functioning. So you have less and less and less and less ability to think, to have judgment, reasoning, fine motor control, to have impulse control, that all of that stuff, if you stay in the context of a perceived threat without interrupting the threat response by relaxing the muscles of your body, then what starts happening is you progressively lose frontal lobe functioning. Is that a big deal? Think about that. Judgment, reasoning, humor, fine motor control, relational skills, language skills, creativity, everything human, all of our human capacities. If we stay in a threat response, if we stay in the context of where we are perceiving threat, like work, without intentionally relaxing the muscles of our body, what happens then progressively throughout that day is we're losing more and more and more of our capacity. We are functioning at a percentage of our capacity because we're losing the part of our brain that gives us maximal capacity. We just don't have the executive control because we're constantly perceiving threat, and your body's managing the threat response more than taking care of business. I don't know. I think that's a big deal. So here's what I was just talking about. This is when a person perceives a threat. Here are the effects of this, the physiological effects. I just talked through those, and the brain effects. That up, down, the more energy in the body, the less brain function that we have. It's a seesaw. And the ACC is the fulcrum between them, as I said. Now, this is sympathetic nervous system. This is all SNS. It's what it does. Why do we have one? What's its purpose? And usually in a workshop, folks say survival. And I say, you're absolutely right if this workshop were 25,000 years ago, but it's not 25 or 30,000 years ago. So I have to disagree with you, is that it's why we've had one, but it's less and less necessary here in the present. Why? Because a brain structure, a structure appeared in the frontal lobe of humans 25, 30,000 years ago that no other animal on the planet has. And that's a blip in evolutional time. So hopefully we're getting better at it. I think that the events that we've seen over the past few days in the country may just be evolutional. I don't know. By the time that you watch this, when it's produced and, 6 months or a year later, we'll know. We'll know now. So that structure that no other animal has. Marine mammals have one, primates have one, but they're not developed. And that structure is called a prefrontal cortex. And what the prefrontal cortex gave us, among a bunch of other things, is we are the only animals on the planet that have the ability to discern the difference between a real versus a perceived threat. We're the only ones that can tell the difference between the two. And that's a cool thing to have. It's a cool thing because it means that we don't have to respond with all this intensity to every single little thing that happens that's perceivably threatening. We're the only animals that can sit out on our back porch drinking our iced tea and watching a snake crawl across. I was hiking out at Edmund Gow Preserve yesterday up north Phoenix, Scottsdale, and got done with the hike and came back to the car and was putting my boots on, and a snake crawled from across the parking lot right beside my car. And I didn't have any threat response with him. There was curiosity and interestingly watching as he or she slithered on past the car and on into the bush that was, the shrubbery that was in front of the car. And I just watched it go across. And I was with a friend and we got into a conversation about acceleration versus speed, because it looked like he was going fast, but not really fast, because it took him 6 seconds to get across the parking lot, where it would take us 2 or 3 from those cars to this car. But no threat on either of our parts. That's kind of cool. Any other animal that snake would have come across there, and a dog or any other animal would have perceived that snake as a threat and would have either attacked it or have run away from it. We're the only ones that have that ability to just notice it. And it wasn't dangerous. It was doing its own thing. Couldn't tell. Never saw its head. I couldn't tell if it was a viper or not. But even if it wasn't danger to me, because it was, at the closest, was 8 feet away from me. Now, if it had turned and come towards me, I would have probably had a threat response. But it didn't. And that's cool. We don't use that gift very well. We certainly don't use it at work and in our relationships with significant others. And as we get to using it more and more, we do better and better job at neuroception. Is there something really dangerous right now? No. And we interrupt that threat response, and then our quality of life is going to get a whole lot better. But the reason why we don't do a good job of that is the curse of the prefrontal cortex. And the curse of the prefrontal cortex, had a couple of them, but for our purposes today, is learning, the way that human beings learn. And what we have learned to do is that any painful experience we've had in our development, physically painful or emotionally painful, what happens is our amygdala activates, threat response activates, and the sensory memory from that painful learning experience gets charged with fear. It's charged with energy. Stay with me on this, because this is important. So what that means is, the next and future times that we're in any situation that has any sensory similarity to any of those painful experiences from the past, then what happens is that charged sensory memory intrudes into our perceptual system, usually unconscious. We can make it conscious, but usually it's happening beneath the threshold of frontal lobe, unconsciously, and it's activating our threat response when we're encountering something here in the present that's not dangerous, but is similar to one of those painful learning situations in the past. How many painful learning situations do you have in your past? Lots. There's zeros on the end of whatever that number is. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, a lot. And if we figure that there are, just conservatively, let's say that we've had 100,000 painful learning experiences, everything from stubbing our toe to being ridiculed, to surgery, to the death of somebody that we care about. Lots and lots and lots of painful experiences back there. And let's say that there are 10 sensory experiences in the future. There's more than that, really, but there are 10 sensory experiences that we can encounter in the future that are similar enough to that learning experience that would cause us to have a threat response. We're now at 1 million. 1 million possibilities in the environment that we encounter those things and we have a threat response from them. And as long as we stay in the context of one of those sensory encounters that are somehow similar to painful past learning, then what happens is our threat response stays on. And unless we get away from that, or we attack it and dismantle it, or render it no longer threatening, fight or flight, unless we successfully do that, then we stay in a threat response. I don't know. I think that's profound. What that means for me, here's how profound that is. Think about this. This is for me, and I suspect it's true for some of you too. One day in junior high school, one of those days in junior high school, pick one, because they were all painful, it seemed like. One of those days taught me to perceive other people's judgment of me as a threat for the rest of my life. And I went to that institution several hundred days, and there were thousands of experiences in junior high school that taught me to be afraid of what other people thought about me. Thousands. And just because I'm denying that it's happening, it's still happening. I hope you get that. It's just that I'm dissociated from it, but the body's responding before. Here's the really kind of challenging part of threat response, is that it happens preconscious and before we're aware, that your body's already activated and in a threat response before your frontal lobe knows that it's happening. So you can't stop it from happening. No matter how much you do. I ain't afraid of nothing, which means that you're perceiving threat all the time. You've just successfully somatically dissociated to not be aware of it. But it's still happening. It's still corroding your body's health. It's still impacting you. It's just that you've become perfectly unaware of it. And some people are able to go on with their lives that way and live quality of life for them. I don't have any judgment about that. However, anybody's finding a way to cope with their history and do that without hurting them, without even hurting themselves, I'm mostly okay with. Without hurting other people, then I'm all good with that. But for those of you who are finding your quality of life diminishing while you are becoming more and more aware of how much you do perceive threat, then I'd like to show you how that you can start to interrupt that threat response so that you can be comfortable in an environment where you are perceiving threat constantly and rarely in danger. So, question that I ask for everybody that I ever work with at this point is I say this is the most important question you'll ever be asked again for the rest of your life. And that question is not, will you marry me? It's a lot more important than that. Because if you don't answer this question right, you can't stay married. You can't tolerate intimacy if you don't get this question right. And that question is, what is right action? What's the right thing to do? What's the right use of your will? When you perceive a threat, but you're in no danger. You perceive the threat, no danger. What's the right thing to do? And sometimes in workshops, people say, change your perception. And I say, oh, wouldn't that be divine? Think back to what we've already done. What's happening with your frontal lobe when you stay in the context of a perceived threat? As the energy is going up, neocortical functioning is going down. So we are progressively losing the ability to change perception, because to change perception, you need to be able to generate language. You need to be able to think through situations. You need to have that judgment and that capacity to manipulate language. And that's something that folks lose after they stay, but not very long, in threat response. So, yeah, it's what made me... It's 2020. And for me, we have reached the threshold. I know a lot of people would vehemently argue with me with this. I had an interesting conversation with Patty Resnick, the developer of cognitive processing therapy, about this. But I think that cognitive therapy has spun out, that it's not useful anymore. It's just not a useful treatment. Descartes was wrong. Albert Ellis was wrong. Thinking doesn't determine how you feel. Thinking does not determine behavior until you've resolved the threat response. Threat response determines everything until you interrupt the threat response. And what it does is it impairs perception. It impairs your ability to change perception, to cognitively restructure. Because to cognitively restructure, you need language. You need a Broca and Wernicke's area to be able to do that, and that's what you lose when you stay in a jacked up system. So no, right action is not thinking. Tail, dog. Got to deal with the dog before the tail. So right action is to use what little bit you have left of your frontal lobe to direct your attention to your body and release the tension in the muscles of your body. And you know what you get with 1 second? 1 second after relaxing the muscles of your body, you know what you get? What the gift you get? 1 second after releasing the constricted muscles in your body, 1 second later, you're in a body that's comfortable. Is that valuable to you? To be able to be in a comfortable body? How valuable would that be for you? While you're at work, while you're driving, while having conflict with your spouse, while you're doing any of the other myriad of activities that you do during the day where you're perceiving threat and you're navigating through it with more energy, brute forcing your way through those contexts, that if you could suddenly have comfort in your body as you went through all those situations, would that be a valuable thing for you? It's 1 second away from every single person on this planet. 1 second away from any human being. All they have to do is stop squeezing the muscles in their body. When you stop squeezing the muscles in your body, you return to a state of comfort. Hallelujah. And for me, I told you guys I had an A score of 9. I was 40 years old before I found my way to a comfortable body. And today, did I get to be in a comfortable body while I'm sitting inside on one of the last temperate days in Arizona before we're in for triple digits for the rest until October? It's like, it was really nice. It was cool out there this morning. And I got in my car and said goodbye longingly to my Ducati as I was driving here this morning to do this recording instead of being on my Ducati riding out into the cool desert. And I still get to be comfortable. Did I get to be comfortable independent of the external situation inside of my skin? If that's all I got from self-regulation, it would be worth the effort and energy that I put into it. That I get to be comfortable as I navigate through a day of perceiving threat all day long. But that's not the only thing, because what also happens within 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 seconds, different for everybody, but what happens usually by 10 or definitely about 20 seconds, unless you got some structural damage, is that your brain reboots. You get back judgment and reasoning and fine motor control, intelligence, creativity, and impulse control, and humor and all of that stuff comes back online. And you know what? When you start teaching people who have distorted perception of themselves and the world to be in a regulated autonomic nervous system, and they have a fully functioning neocortex, then they start writing perceptions all by themselves. That their perceptions shift spontaneously and to go, oh, well, I don't believe that anymore. That's not right. That it begins to, that their perceptual process evolves spontaneously. Now, occasionally they need a little nudge, but they certainly don't need a course of rehearsing affirmations. But that's for a different training and a different day. So, yes, right action in the context of a perceived threat where there is no danger is to relax the muscles of your body. How about somebody's got a gun to your head? How about you do have COVID-19? How about that you have stage 4 cancer or somebody who is chasing you in a car? What's right action then? Think about it. Well, what I would say to that is depends on where you are in the timeline of that thing. If you're in the first 30 seconds of it, then absolutely capitulate to instinct. That your instincts are probably going to serve you best in that situation for the first 30 seconds. That you're going to be stronger, faster, smarter. You're going to brain process. You're probably going to come up with the absolute best thing to do in those 30 seconds. But if the thing lasts longer than 30 seconds, then you need a second gear. And instead of staying in the instinctual process where you're left with only aggression or avoidance, and if you can't navigate successfully with aggression or avoidance back to interoception, back to safety, then what happens is your autonomic nervous system shuts you down. And you go into shock, you go into recalcitrant depression, you go into regression. Talk a little bit about that later. So if the thing lasts longer than 30 seconds, then it's really even more important that you relax the muscles of your body. Lest you find yourself, as this week we have seen lots and lots and lots of good people do bad things. And I'm absolutely certain that every one of those good people during the protests that we've seen on both sides of the fence, that you've seen people that are in their threat response for extended period of times and then taking actions which are, they look back and go, oh my gosh, this week in the news was a 60-year-old man who attacked a child that was putting posters up for that Black Lives Matter. And you can see there's a video of him doing it. I mean, just completely incriminated. He was arrested, I think, yesterday or the day before. And I read a thing this morning about that where he talked about it. And he's like, I can't even believe that I did that. Like, I look at that and I'm absolutely, completely and totally horrified and ashamed that I was capable of doing that. And man, watching the video, just clearly he's in a threat response. And he's acting in ways that he does not have a frontal lobe available to him. He's not able to, he was in perceived threat and he stayed in that threat response for a period of time and he just lost all executive control and it was only about survival. And he violated his integrity so far that he couldn't even recognize himself. That's what happens when you stay in a threat response and don't interrupt it. So yes, even in real danger, law enforcement officers need to learn to dial down their arousal in real danger instead of staying in hypervigilance, because hypervigilance is unsustainable and you reach a place where it is diminishing functioning, diminished motor skills, diminished strength and stamina, diminished intelligence and language capacity. So it's completely counterintuitive. But the more dangerous the situation is, the more the person needs to be in a regulated, down-regulated autonomic nervous system, as Lieutenant Colonel David Grossman says, lest they kill themselves or their squad mates. So real danger or perceived threat, right action is down-regulation, not up-regulation. So last part of this, and then we'll move on, is if I put myself in the context of a perceived threat and I do not relax my body, then I will involuntarily engage in aggression or avoidance. as Stephen Porges says, involuntarily mobilize. That the energy in my body, I am compelled now to act without a frontal lobe to direct me, that I cannot stop myself. It becomes compulsive, that I become aggressive or avoidant if I stay in that threat response. Because what's happening is the energy is going up, and check it, the part of our brain that is responsible for managing that energy, that we need to be able to direct and mitigate that energy, is diminishing. And so if we stay in that threat response, then these are on a collision course. And as the energy becomes more than the diminishing capacity of our brain can manage, then we capitulate to aggression or avoidance. And it's been one of the most profound things of my work to discover that. And I've built a whole treatment protocol around it. And here, for any time you violate, you stay in a threat response without relaxing your body, no matter how much devotion you have to a set of principles, you will act against those principles. You cannot consistently navigate through perceived threat with aggression, with brute force, with holding it together without eventually violating those principles. And what a lot of folks do is that they don't violate them while other people are watching, but as soon as they're off work, then they violate them heavily with food, spending, alcohol, drugs, to be able to soothe the effort that it took for them to be able to hold it together while they had an audience. So, said a little bit differently, anytime you've ever done any behavior for which you are ashamed, you did that while you were in the context of a perceived threat and failed to relax the muscles of your body. And said yet even a little bit more differently, and I think a little bit more profoundly, is that anytime you violate your integrity, anytime that you're snarky or sharp with the person that you've chosen to love, anytime you yell at your children, anytime you take shortcuts at work, anytime that you're aggressive with your gesticulations while driving, every single violation of your integrity in your life is a fight or flight behavior. All of them. And as we teach people to confront the perceived threats of their day in a body that is relaxed, not only do they get a comfortable body, which is nice, not only do they get the restoration of neocortical functioning, which they become intelligent and creative in the way that they handle that situation, that's nice, but they find themselves able to navigate through their day, staying on the beam of their integrity. That no matter who's yelling at them, no matter who's demanding what from them, no matter what's going on in the world, no matter what their bank accounts say, they are able to navigate all the way through that day to the end of their day, put their head on the pillow at night, look back over the day and go, I didn't breach my integrity one time today. All day long, I stayed true to my principles. I don't know how you live a better life than that. I think that's a really nice definition for what's atop of Maslow's pyramid. Self-actualization. I think that's a good definition for self-actualization. Do I go where I aim myself? Am I who I choose to be in all those situations? And the reason why our clients fail to do that's the same reason that we fail. We walk into those situations of high demand in our life that we perceive as threatening, and we're not regulating, and what's happening, energy going up, neocortical functioning going down, and the way that we're navigating through those situations is we're muscling and we're fighting our way through it, and the energy becomes so high that we end up either now avoiding what is important for us to step to or acting out with aggression to try to change the environment, usually unsuccessfully. This is a victim stance, man. This is victim. But as we are able to confront those situations in a body that stays relaxed, we're able to remain intentional. And that's when we get into this afternoon, when we get into the resilience skills, that's one of the resilience skills, is starting to become intentional instead of reactive in your work context. And to do that, you have to regulate your autonomic nervous system. So I'm going to ask you to take a second right now, and if you're doing this with somebody else, that's great. But if not, you won't get to do the share part, but the pair share part. But I am going to ask you to take a quick write. So I'm going to ask you to just pause the video and to just take 60 seconds, because it's been me kind of blah, 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 blah. And I want you to just digest this a little bit to kind of write down your thoughts. And just for 60 seconds, just bullet points, just some ideas. Do that, and then I'll and then turn it back on, and we'll finish up this piece. So, oh, darn. I spent about 4 hours yesterday augmenting and doing all kinds of cool work for this PowerPoint, getting it ready for today. And I did that on my home computer. Even worked on it some this morning. Woke up early this morning before I started doing the video. But what I didn't do was I didn't save it to Dropbox. So when I brought my laptop to the office 20 miles away here in Mesa, it was not in Dropbox, so I couldn't download it. So I had to use an old slide set and try to Frankenstein some of the changes that I made to make it more usable as this recorded rather than a live activity. So I apologize that you're having to deal with some of my incompetence. So give me just a second here, and I want to finish this piece up with a little bit of a bang. Arrgh. Zach, see if you can go back to right when we came out of when I asked the folks to do the writing for 60 seconds, and see if you could start to cut from there to right here where I'm about to start in, and just chop that piece out. I'd be very grateful. Thank you. So an hour ago, we kind of set this up that these were the causes. This is what, most folks identify as the causes, and these are the effects of stress, work stress, life stress. My hope is that as I've gone through what I've gone through with you, you can start to see that it's a little bit more complex than that. That these are not causal. They are antecedents. They're triggers. Here's the causal process, and it is the painful learning that is associated with all of these in the history, that encountering these in the present turns into a perceived threat, and then it ends up, I didn't say this earlier, about the sympathetic and parasympathetic system. It's a bipolar, biphasic system. When the parasympathetic dominant system when the parasympathetic system is dominant, then the sympathetic system is recessive, and vice versa. Is that they're bipolar and biphasic. So that we're built to live in the parasympathetic system. So, sympathetic system should only be on when there's something that we perceive as threat. It gives us a jolt of energy. We interrupt that threat response in the body, come back down towards comfort. Now we are energized and we are maximally functioning. That's the way it's supposed to work. But what's happening for a lot of us is that we're perceiving threat all day long and we're not interrupting that. So we move into a state that's called sympathetic dominance. It's where the sympathetic nervous system is on all the time, also known as hypervigilance. And that no animal can sustain that. It's unsustainable without it metastasizing inside of the individual and causing all kinds of physical and psychological problems. So, see if you can, here's a little caveat to this. Sympathetic activation, good. Sympathetic dominance, bad. I wouldn't want to live my life without my sympathetic nervous system. It's where joy, it's where excitement, it's where passion, it's where energy comes from. But again, it's not built to stay on. It is where the sympathetic nervous system stays on that turns into all of this stuff over here. It is not it's not the threat response. It's the ongoing full pedal to the metal constancy of the threat response that turns into all of these symptoms. So said a little bit differently, if I attached a different colored thread to each one of these boxes, and we stretch that thread from the box, let's say that the box is here and the wall over there, we stretched, and imagine that the box on the screen here, and we stretched it over that wall. We let the wall over there represent your birth, and the box here on the screen represents your present. We can pick any one of those experiences. I could say pick any of them: the news, your health, finances, any of those situations at work. And what we can do is that we can trace that thread from here in the present back to your birth, all the way through your life. And what we're going to find along that thread are specific, discrete moments of painful learning associated with each one of these contexts. So that when you step into them in the present, it's just like a combat veteran, an American combat veteran on the 4th of July, having an exaggerated startle when the fireworks are going off. Are they in danger? No. But man, are they perceiving threat. Why? Not because of the fireworks. The fireworks are not causing the distress. Because if they didn't have a combat history, they would not be having that response. What's happening is this is a sensory similar situation to the painful learning, to the trauma of combat, and all those sensory memories of being shelled in Vietnam or Iraq or wherever else, is those sensory memories are intruding, causing that combat veteran to now perceive threat here in the present where there is no danger. Intense amount of threat, enough to have involuntary muscle movement. Exaggerated startle. Not the fireworks causing that, the intrusion of past painful learning. So there's only one cause of stress that is, has been, or ever will be for every human being, for any human being. And that cause is the perception of threat, and then the subsequent autonomic nervous system dysregulation that follows behind that perception of threat.